Okay, so the goal for today's video is to talk about two-dimensional arrays. Two-dimensional arrays, so this is going to kind of build off some stuff we've done before. We talked a lot about arrays last semester. And if you remember a few things about arrays, they're a way of storing data, really. They're very valuable because we can kind of put data that's similar to each other kind of all in one spot. So for example, if you're making like a video game, you don't want to have like player 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You might want to store those all in one location. So we don't have to have all these different variables. We might as well store these like variables all in one kind of collection. And we said an array kind of looks something like this, right? And I think there's some videos, if you search through my channel, you can find some videos on arrays if you need a little bit of a refresher on that. But the kind of information is stored in here. We might store students' ages, could be an example, or student ID numbers could be stored in an array. So a two-dimensional array, or three-dimensional, or any kind of multi-dimensional array is, well, I mean, we see it a lot of times in like a spreadsheet. A spreadsheet is an example of a two-dimensional array. Because now we have these boxes kind of going this dimension, but also we have these other rows too. So we might start thinking about rows and columns. So that's kind of what a two-dimensional array is. But the best way to look at a two-dimensional array, so I mean, it's a good way of like storing data. We might use this for, how could we use this? We could use this with like, maybe not the best example, but again, just kind of going back to students, we could store names in the first column, and they would put their grades in the column, in the appropriate columns to the right of that, or their ages, location. Any of those things could be stored in a two-dimensional array. Maybe not the best choice. Maybe a class might be better for that. But, we could store some data. You could imagine some data we could store in a two-dimensional array like that. The best way to think about a two-dimensional array is that it's an array of arrays. So what that means is let's start with an array that looks like this. This is our primary array. Let's really do draw a straight line thing on this anyways. So we have this is a one-dimensional array. So that's like a 1D. We don't talk about 1D, we just say it's an array, but it's a one-dimensional array. If we're going to have a two-dimensional array, basically what we're doing is we are making an array of arrays. So we might put inside of each one of these boxes, we're going to store data about another array. And they could have different lengths, but just for the sake of this, we'll say they all have the same length. So now we have a bunch of data stored in here, and I mean, I'm just going to come up with some random numbers. This might be 1, 7, 6, 3, 9, 2, 1, 10, 18. So now all these data, they are stored within their own array that's also located within, it's kind of like this secondary array within the major big array. Going back to our original arrays, we said that the way that we access the locations here is by their address or by their index. So we have that 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if we want to access the data at this location, we're going to access index 5. So if this was like an array called nums, or num, I guess, we want to access that, we'd say, okay, well, it's num 5. So you might ask the same question, how am I going to access some data in here? It's clearly not just one number because, well, it's a two-dimensional array. But this can actually work the exact same way. We have 0, 1, 2 for the major array. I really wish I'd drawn a straight line. It's bothering me. But then also for the arrays within the primary array, within these like kind of secondary ones, these also have an address of 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. And you could think about this like an apartment building where you have floors and then you have apartments on each floor. So if I wanted to go to a particular apartment, I might say, okay, well, I need to go to the 28th floor. I need to go to building or apartment 3 on the 28th floor. There might be a bunch of apartment 3s, but they'd all be on different floors. So like we have an address location here too, but it's within the array, within the primary array 0. So think about that. These big blocks are the floors of the apartment, and these individual things are the kind of the individual rooms or houses within that apartment floor. Okay, so how do we access this? I want to access, say, this 9 right here, and we'll call this we'll just call it values. So this array, this whole big giant array, is called values. Now what we need to do in order to access this, well, it's kind of the same way as accessing an apartment within a particular floor. The first thing we need to do is access the floor. So in this case, that's going to be our array 1, location 1 here. And you notice I put in 2 brackets because we need to identify the floor and then the apartment. So here we're going to use 1 to access this location in the array. And then within that, we need to access 1, and that will print us a value of 9. That will access that value. So those are the basics of a 2-dimensional array. It's an array within arrays. And if we wanted to get even crazier, we could have an array within an array within an array. We won't really do that too much, but like, just know, like, we could have a 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional or 5-dimensional, however many dimensions you want. Typically we stick with 2, but just kind of know that we could have, well, it's an array within an array within an array. But all these rules would still hold true, right? If we want to access something in here, we'd say, well, that's a 0, 1, and then we're going to access like this one. So 0, 1, 1 would access that particular location. And you might think about that as being like bedrooms within an apartment. We won't go into, you don't need to worry too much about 3-dimensional arrays or higher, but just know that is an option, right? And there's no difference between, we just keep adding in these arrays within, you keep kind of digging deeper. Always go back to inception. Levels within levels. So I think overall that should give a good introduction to finding values within an array. It's very similar to within a 2-dimensional array. It's very similar to a 1-dimensional, but we just need to worry about, now we have 2 values. And we can do searches through that. We can do, there's all sorts of valuable things that we can do with that. And it's a really powerful tool that we'll need to work on. So in the second half of this video, I'm going to go through how would you search through a 2-dimensional array. And so if we wanted to find all the values, and I might use an example from Replit to do this. So how can we look through an entire list of the 2-dimensional array list? And I think for this one, we want to find like maybe the sum. Oh, actually, for this one, looks like they want to do I'll just do the very first problem, exercise 91, listed in Replit. And it's going to like try and double the array and then print it back out. So this is the problem we're looking at. So basically what they've done is they've created a double. It's a 2-dimensional arrays of doubles. So just a bunch of decimals organized into an array. And so what I'm going to do is pause the video real quick and let me convert this into the form we were talking about previously. So 1 second. Actually, no, I think it might be worthwhile to just show a little bit about what this is actually going to look like. Like how I'm going to take these values here and then place it into my array. So what we're having here, I mean, this is a double array, so it's a 2-dimensional double array. So this first set of values is going to be, we have this overall block, and we have like, there's 3 arrays within this 2-dimensional array. This is one of those, 2, 3, and each one of them has 3 values. So in my diagram over here, I'm going to draw these values like this, 1, 2, 3. And so within each one of these, like basically this, we still have these addresses here. Within 0, the only thing that's stored within 0 is just this other array. There's no other values in here. There's no other numbers. It's just storing this data. So we can go through and number all these, 0 for the major, and then for these kind of secondary arrays, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. And what we need to do is take these values and fill those in there. I'm not going to show you all of them, but I will do the first one, right? This is our first, the first array in this 2-dimensional array is going to be 1.4, okay? 2.0. Oh, I messed up, didn't I? 3.3. And then we'll have to add one more onto here. Good thing I have a little bit of space here. And that should be 2. Kind of misread the number of values there. So we have these 4 values in this double. I keep saying the wrong thing. We have these doubles within this array here. Okay, so I've basically just transferred all the values in there. I made them blue so it's sticks out a little bit more. And the goal of this task, this is again exercise number 91 from Replit, is just to go through and double all these values. So with an array, we're getting the actual values, so we can just go through there and change them directly. So we can just go in. So really what we're going to be asked to do is go through each one of these values and double them. Okay, so this is going to require a couple loops, because the first thing we're going to have to do is we need to look through, we can imagine it's kind of 2 loops. One that's looking through the primary array, and then one that's looking through these kind of secondary arrays inside. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a loop. And I'm just going to write some pseudocode here. and it's going to loop from 0 to 2. And that's just going to handle these 1, 2, 3 locations. But within each time we go run through this loop, we're going to want to evaluate 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to want to evaluate what's inside of these 4 locations. So I'm also, within this loop, we're going to loop from 0 to 3. So every time this runs, so if we say, let's call this n and this, let's call this n and we'll call this m. If we made a trace table for this, we'd see n is 0, m is 0, n is still 0, m is 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, and then finally 1, 0, so on and so forth, right? I think we've done a little bit of nested loops here, but just to be clear about what this is going to do. And of course, we get, I'm not going to go through all of them, but 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, and we go through the rest with n turning into 2. So the value here is that n is staying at 0 this whole time, and m is increasing as we go through, and then n is increasing to 1. So this is valuable because it's going to allow us to create a loop where our 2 values are going to, over time, are going to hit every single last location in here. So we want to access the value in each one of these. If I wanted to just print it, I might do something like system out print, and I'm going to say, well, the name of this, I think we said this is, we'll call this like values. I'd say values n m. This would go through and it's going to go into the array and it's going to start with, if we look through the values of n and m here in the trace table, start with n is 0, m is 0, 0, 1, and this is going to go through every location in here and print out all the values. So if we wanted to double the value of this, like we do in this question, it's just asking us to double the values of the array, we would take this structure, and then instead of printing this out, all we need to do is say, well, okay, values n m times equal 2. And that's just going to double the values in there. So let me take a quick second to run through this. And it's a little bit tricky because you have to think, like, it's hard to kind of think, wrap your head around to begin with using a loop within a loop. But so you can see what I've done in here is I've typed this in. I used our m, used our n. M is less than 2, n plus plus, n is less than 3, n plus plus, and then array m n times equals 2. And this whole thing, and this is just from the Replit's already made for it, it's going to help us print this out. So if we run this, you can see 1.4 should turn into 2.8, 2 should turn into 4, 2.8, 4, 3.3 turns into 6.6, and 2 here. Oh, I must have messed something up here because 2, this last value is not getting doubled. Oh, so that's a problem. I must have messed something up in here. Oh, and I mean, so I'm going to leave this in here because it's a classic mistake. I did, well, I mean, I think you can look through and kind of figure out what I did. The last column is not getting changed, and also the last row is not getting changed. So I was a little bit silly, and I did, must be out of practice from doing my coding. If I changed that, I just didn't, I did as less than 2, so it's not running in the last, in that last array. It's not checking that, because once it hits 2, it's going to exit. So I need to adjust that to say 3, or I could say less than or equal to. Now if I run this, all the values should update. I'll get 3.2. It's going to double. Okay, so that's how we're going to run through a 2-dimensional array and search through all the things. And using this skill, like everything else is just especially everything in Replit is just an application of this. So yeah, because if you're going to do sums or find the maximum value, like it's all going to be something similar to this using nested arrays. So you need to practice and practice. One last thing that I'll mention, and this is an advanced skill, but it is something worth knowing how to do. So I'm going to put it down here, is that if we want to access like when I did this, I had a bit of a problem because I put in the actual values. I said like 2 and 3 or 3 and 4, and that's not kind of bad because how do I know the length of the array? I might not know the length of the array. So a better thing to do is that we can use, well, like we know how to do already, we can use like value dot, so we know if we want to find like the number of items in an array, we could access like length. So this thing here will get us the length of like the number of items in this whole big primary array. If we want to access if we want to find the length of this though, it's actually all we need to do is just say value and then say 0 length. And that's going to get the length of the array that's located at position 0 in the primary array. So that'll give us that length of 4 here. Or if I want to say this one, value 1 length. So, and also, you know, in this case, all of these lengths, maybe a further tricky part on this is like, what if the lengths, what if these arrays had a different length? That could be a little bit tricky. Let me show you how this would work if I go back to my code. So instead of saying m is less than 3, I'm just going to say, okay, whatever my array is, let's get the length of that. And now when we run this, still is going to work out the same way, right? We're still going to run through. And here we could do array, let's find the length of the array located at position 0, and this would also work. All right, and it's just a little bit more sophisticated because now, no matter what array I put in there, whatever two-dimensional array I put in there, it's going to work. Last thing, and you can shut off the video if you haven't already, if you don't need to know this, but it could be valuable for your IAs. They do like to have two-dimensional array stuff is a valuable thing to have. If you have an array where the values aren't the same, well, what you could do is you could say, when I look at this thing, when I look at this first array position, let's find the length of that. And then when I go to here, when I go to array location 1, let's find the length of that. Array location 2, let's find the length of that. So what we would do here is instead of saying array 0, because that's just the first location, we could say array m. And then it's going to say, okay, well, whatever, when we look into our secondary arrays, whatever we'll figure out their length, and then we'll loop through each thing in there. And so now if we did something like this, where we have an array with different sizes, it's still going to work. Or if we increase the length of this, we increase this to 5.1, it's going to search through. It should work for everything. Hopefully this is going to work. Yeah, okay. I'm sure it's going to give some weird error. Yeah, so 5.1 is going to double. Because the length of this array is different from the previous two. If we didn't do something like this, if we just said 0 in here, we'd kind of skip this last value because we'd only be checking for an array length, the secondary array length of 4, but in this case we have 5 things in there. So this is the little dynamic thing we could do to search through different length arrays. Okay, sorry for the long video. Hopefully that was helpful though in looking at how to do I keep saying double, to do two-dimensional arrays.